So we are going to get started because it is 12:01. And if you've seen me before, you know I can talk, so we try to start on time or early with me. So good afternoon, and thank you for being here for the program today, which is Designing Florida. I'm Emily Coughlin. I'm the collections manager here at the History Center, and I would like to welcome everyone that's here in person and everyone that is joining us online. We greatly appreciate your support. At the end, we will have some time for questions. I will do my best to leave the time for questions. So if you've been here, we're not going to do the post-it thing. This will be easier. All right, so without further ado, we will get started. Okay, so first up is Lee Oscar Lawrie. And Lee Lawrie was a sculptor. He won tons of awards. He was born in 1877 in Germany. He came to the U.S. when he was an infant with his family, and he passed away at the age of 85 in Maryland. He ended up actually studying he got a bachelor's degree in fine arts and then later an honorary master's from Yale. And then he went on to teach at Yale until 1912. Like I said, he got many awards and accolades. He was actually one of the sculptors that worked on the White City. If you're familiar with the World's Columbian Exposition, 1893 in Chicago, he was one of the sculptors that was employed for that. And one of his accolades was that he was the sculptor who did all of the work, all the sculptural pieces on the Singing Tower at Bok Tower Gardens. So the Singing Tower and Bok Tower Gardens, if you are familiar with it, and if you've been there, originally it was called the Mountain Lake Sanctuary, and it was referred to as Mr. Bok's gift to the American people. And in 1926, Bok was determined to create the perfect addition to the sanctuary because it was really just a nature sanctuary at the time. And he thought, let's build a tower, let's do all of this. So he worked with Frederick Olmsted, who was a renowned landscape architect, and they worked to create the gardens. And he brought in Milton Maderi, who was a Philadelphia architect, and then he also worked with Lee Lawrie. So the Singing Tower is a carrion tower. It's a bell tower, essentially, and they do have someone on staff at all times who plays them. And they do concerts. If you haven't seen them, they're very cool. Highly recommend. But all of the sculptural work that was going to be on it was going to be made out of Georgia marble, which at the time was a huge deal because it was very expensive and very difficult to work with. Where Lawrie, because he was a sculptor, he specialized in stone, he was able to work with it quite easily. And another reason they chose it is because you see how the tower has kind of the pink hue to it. That's the Georgia marble that gives it kind of that veining and the pink hue. So when it came to Lawrie, he was, of course, thrilled to work on it. And he said, since the Singing Tower is in a bird and plant sanctuary, the scheme of the sculpture was mostly of birds and plants. So if you've seen it, you've seen how that motif kind of continues throughout. Now we're going to break it down a little bit. One of the elements, I should say, is these decorative bands that you see throughout the tower, particularly on this level. It's at the 30-foot level of the tower. They're high relief sculpted bands, which just means that the actual, like the birds and everything, are higher than the background. And it features Florida birds. So you see there's a pelican, there's flamingos, herons, geese, swans, and the groups of raptors were reminiscent of Aesop's fables. But they were also some of the birds that, if you visited Bok Tower at the time, you could see. So you can see in the picture, as I pointed out, about 30 feet up, you can see the bands of all the birds. Another feature that he was very proud of were the window grills. So on the east and west windows are these sculpted grills. One of them features the figure of a young man feeding flamingos and other birds. And he's encircled with elaborate foliage. And the second one depicts a young man watering the plants in the sanctuary. So essentially, it's two figures who are just caring for the property and the gardens. Because it was done with Georgia marble, he's quoted as saying, "The stone used is an important factor in the success of architectural sculpture. An excellent design can lose its character, for vigorous design its force, if the material will not allow a brilliant interpretation." So, as a stone sculptor, he's praising the marble for essentially bringing his work to life, even though he's the one that's carving it. Another feature that you can't really see when you stand next to the tower because it's up on the top, you kind of have to get close, or as you're driving in, you'll see them, are the eagles and the finials that are on the top of the tower. So you do see some halfway up, there's an octagon, and the corner finials are eagles, and Lawrie chose to do eagles because Bok kept saying that this was his gift to the nation, this was his gift to the American people, this tower and this sanctuary. And atop the tower are male and female herons. You can see the males are depicted with fish in their mouth, while the females are depicted sitting on a nest. And each bird is about 14 feet tall, so you can see them trying to raise it up the tower. Each sculpture has perforated panels between it that features palms and roses. And something interesting, during the construction of the tower, it was struck by lightning. And within a month of this happening, they immediately put in a lightning prevention system because obviously they didn't want that happening. And there was also some hurricane damage. So you can see the picture where the heron is more or less missing its head. That one had to be fixed because it was damaged in a hurricane. One of the other things that he is incredibly proud of was the sundial. Now, he did not actually design the sundial as a whole. He sculpted the snake for the sundial. And beneath the serpent is carved the chronological table, so you can actually tell time, and it works up to a fraction of a minute. And surrounding the sundial are reproduction models of the zodiac signs. Though they were originally drawn by Lee Lawrie, they were carved and modeled by Robert Wakeman, who was his assistant. And Wakeman Lawrie mentored him, so he actually worked very closely with him, and he was actually the foreman on the project at Bok Tower, because Lawrie couldn't always be there to keep up with everything, so he sent Wakeman to do it. But we do have Bok Tower, actually, if you ever get to go there and meet with their archivist, they have killer archives, tons of photos of the construction, and these photos are actually of the serpent that he drew, but then Wakeman modeled, I should say, before it was done for the actual sundial. Now, if you ever get to go inside the singing tower, which I checked, you have to be a certain level member, and I work for a nonprofit, so that's not happening. But if anyone ever gets to go, they do tours of the interior. And when this was designed, Bok kind of wanted it to be a cozy place. So you walk in, and there's vaulted ceilings, there's a fireplace, again, all by Lawrie. So a low-relief sculpture sits above the fireplace of Florida. And it shows a Spanish galleon, which apparently there's thousands of those off our coast. The figure of the wine below, there's Neptune riding on his seahorses, and it's all over the fireplace. And you can see there's a medieval bell ringer on each side, and there's figures that are also listening to the bells on either side of the fireplace. This one is actually an old postcard that is in our collection. It's very difficult to find color photos of what that would have looked like when it was completed. So if you've seen it, you already know this, but it is an awe-inspiring feature at Bok Tower. And Mr. Bok, as I've said a million times, it was his gift to the nation. It was his gift to the American people. And he actually is quoted as saying, "Make your world a bit better or more beautiful because you have lived in it." And that was his goal. So that was one of the reasons he built this. And our next artist, I shouldn't be biased. This one is my favorite. So this is Robert Evans Locher, or to his friends, Bobby Locher. He was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, raised in Lancaster. He went on to train as a draftsman in Philadelphia, He wanted nothing to do with the career. He wanted to be an artist, but his father was a banker and said, absolutely not. You cannot be an artist. So he went to Philadelphia, and as soon as he finished school, he ran away to New York and opened his own studio. He worked with some interior designers and started creating his own stuff. And he would come back to Lancaster periodically, mostly just to visit his mom and his sisters after his father passed away. And he kind of made a name for himself both with interior design, but also with just the furniture he did and all of the other stuff that he was doing. He did move back to Lancaster in 1943. He was very good friends with Charles Demuth, if anyone has ever heard of him. He's a master watercolorist. And they were such good friends that when Charlie passed away in 1935, his will stipulated that the house and all of his watercolors would go to Bobby. All of the oil paintings would go to Georgia O'Keeffe, because he was also friends with Georgia O'Keeffe. Well, Charlie's mother, Augusta, outlived him. So when she passed away in 1943, she upheld her son's will and gave Bobby the house and all the watercolors. So he and his partner, Richard Wayon, moved in. They started a little antique shop on the first floor, and then that was actually where Bobby passed away in June of 1956. But as I said, he made a name for himself. Unfortunately, some of these people kind of get forgotten along the way, and he was one of them. So he became a costume designer for the Greenwich Village Follies and some Broadway productions. He did a ton of fashion illustrations for magazines like Rogue, Vogue, House and Garden, Vanity Fair. He was working for Condé Nast in 1916, and he did the first ever Parisian cover of Vogue. And he also decorated apartments for New York's elite. Interior design was something he loved, and he was a muralist. So beyond his furniture, which you can see the picture at the bottom is a table, that's actually the table that he designed for Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney when she had a studio at the original Whitney Museum on 8 West 8th Street in New York. And it was featured in Vogue in 1927. And then in 1934, he worked with Rogers, Bolin, and Lunt, who were silversmiths, to create his own silverware. And he called it Modern Classic. And you can see his initials are on the silverware. And then the picture next to it is probably one of my favorites. It's him working with a photographer for a magazine. That's how they got the photograph of like the big table spreads. When you see those in old magazines, they literally would just suspend a photographer up there 30 feet in the air to try to get the shot. Oops. All right. So he does have a connection to Florida, I promise. All right. So this is that connection. It was originally called the Hanley House. It was built by Robert Hanley, Esquire, who was a financier and stockbroker in New York. He had amassed a fortune from all of his time in New York, and around the 1920s, Florida was seeing a land boom, and a ton of people were moving here. Well, Hanley was one of them. So he came down here on business, fell in love with New Smyrna, and decided, I'm going to build a house. So he returned in 1923 to build what he was calling his tropical escape. So he did, but unfortunately, it was short-lived because he was a financier, but he wasn't great with finances, and he ended up selling the house in 1928. So he only had it for 5 years. Most of the time, it was under construction. But it is a gorgeous Mediterranean revival. It took years to complete. The house is kind of piecemeal. There is, there's one story that has 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a music room, a ballroom, vaulted ceilings, fireplace, patio, and then the other section, it's all connected, but the other section is 2 stories with 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, and there's only 1 kitchen in this entire house. But it also had chauffeur's quarters above the garage, and it was a really weird house at the time, even in the 1920s when he was building it. But one of the things that he did was hired Bobby Locher to create murals for the home, because that was what you did. You did murals all over your house. So one of the notable ones, sorry, my computer's being a little slow. So this is the library of the home. And these were created by Bobby Locher because he was also an interior designer. And it depicts scenes from the history of Florida from its discovery up until modern times, which at the time, 1920s. So he was a fashion illustrator, as I mentioned, and because of this, he had a really unique way of depicting people. I didn't do a close-up of it, but you can kind of see with the figures, they don't really have facial features. They're very 2D. So it's notable this was something, when you see these figures, you know who did it. And in one mural, you see the landing of Ponce de Leon in 1513. And you can't see it in the pictures because color pictures of this do not exist. The homeowners just, they have them, they just don't share them. But he is against a bright blue sky. This entire thing is incredibly colorful. Even to this day, it's still really brightly colored. And you see throughout the scenes, we've got the Native Americans, you've got the Spanish arriving, and then all the way up to modern day where you see, where are they? Over there, the far one. You see people sitting on the beach. And it kind of goes around the room. And then because he couldn't just do the walls, the ceilings have cypress beams that you can see. So the entire room is painted aquamarine to make you feel like you're underwater while you're looking at these scenes. And I really wish that there were color photos because it's very cool.
So these walls still exist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not in person. I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you. Another thing that he did for the New Smyrna home was what he called the Silver Hall. So 1920s Art Deco, bright colors, everything's shiny. So there was a hallway that more or less connected the two buildings, and he called it the Silver Hallway because when he painted it, he literally papered the walls with silver wallpaper. And then he was inspired by Florida, flora and fauna, and created this lush corridor. Everything is brightly colored. The entire design is done in greens, reds, pinks, and then he thought out everything. There was moss green flooring so that it would make you feel like you were walking on grass, like through a jungle and through this hallway. And then he also, all the woodwork was painted a deep green. So in between the walls, the molding, all of it was a deep green. So you would be fully immersed in this silver multicolor hallway as you walked on green flooring. But as I said, it did originally kind of connect the two homes. Today, one of these doorways, this doorway that you can see in this picture, has actually been walled off. I'll get into it in more detail, but the home has been split. So that's actually walled off. The final room that he did for this was the writing room. So Locher, of course, thought everything through. So he was inspired. It was more of an Asian theme for this room. So you see the entwining plants, you see the birds, and again, everything is very brightly colored. The walls were lime green with lemon yellow, and then they were decorated with, the designs are a blue, like a teal color. All the pilasters in the room were white, but they couldn't just be white. So he went around with a cloth, and he would do this with a lot of stuff to kind of give it more flavor, we'll say. And there's touches of yellow and blue and green, and he would just kind of rub the color in just to blend it and make it something new. But imagine you're sitting in there trying to write a letter, and the walls are lime green. No, thank you. So this was all about 1925. He's doing this. It's featured in Vogue, because of course. And then when Hanley is forced to sell the house in 1928, he sells it to Frank Brisley from Ohio. Brisley is the one that called it El Real Retiro, or Retiro. So essentially it was it's Spanish for the Royal Retreat. He was the one that named it that, and then he went on to make some changes to it, nothing too drastic, But he also didn't live there for that long. He passed away in 41, and as soon as he passed away, the wife sold it and she moved back to Ohio. But it has undergone some changes over the years, but nothing to the facade, which is actually quite incredible because it is not a historic landmark. They have tried to get it historic landmark status. They've been working on it for a while, but in 1951, the mansion was split into two. So where that door was that I showed you, that's where it was walled off. So now both sides have kitchens and everything because it was one house. They had to split it into two. The south wing became 637 North Riverside Drive, and the two-story wing became 747 Faulkner Street. All of Locher's murals are in the Faulkner Street house. Luckily, the people who own the Faulkner Street house understand the history and love the history of the home and the murals, so they have preserved it. The other side of the house has been completely gutted and modernized. The facade is still there, but like kitchens, everything. You can look this place up on like Zillow because it was for sale not too long ago. But the Faulkner Street side is the same. The people who bought it, if I remember correctly, the people that own it are the ones, their family, the ones are the ones that bought it in like 51. So they have really cared for it this entire time. I will stress that these are private residences, so please don't go showing up on their doorstep. They really don't like that.
Can you repeat the address?
Only, okay. So it's 637 North Riverside Drive and 747 Faulkner Street. So one side basically faces the water and the other doesn't. It's kind of like an L shape. It's a really cool place. So as I said, it is a private residence, so please don't just show up on their doorstep. Oh my gosh, 10 years ago almost 10 years ago when I met the owners, they're very nice people, but I can't imagine they would be very excited if you just showed up on their doorstep. But as I said, no, I did not. We invited them to the museum. They came to us. That's actually how, my former museum, that's actually how we got these photos, because they brought the photos to us and gave them to the Demuth Museum in Lancaster. We asked for color photos, and the lady that owned the Faulkner Street house just laughed and was like, no. But they were on New Smyrna does like a garden and home tour. They were on that in 2024. So check, maybe they'll do it again. I know, I wish I would have known. I would have gone to see it. So we go next to probably the most famous, I don't like to say he's the most famous artist, but probably the most famous artist that worked in Central Florida, Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm sure everyone has heard of Frank Lloyd Wright. He is considered the premier architect of the 20th century. He was born in 1867 in Wisconsin, which is actually where he built his home base, Taliesin, if you've heard of the Taliesin House in Wisconsin. And then he built a second Taliesin in Arizona. But he studied at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, apprenticed in Chicago, and then in 1893 started his own firm. As you probably all know, Wright has influenced architects worldwide. He mentored countless students, tons of designers, and it was one of his things was that he didn't just think about the architecture when he was working on these projects. He thought about everything. The fabric that would go on the furniture, the flatware that would be on the tables, the colors of everything. He was very, very involved. But another thing that he is famous for is what is called organic architecture. So all of his structures are designed to meld with nature. A lot of times he would use natural materials. He hated paint. He really wanted things to just be the color that they were. And he didn't like clutter. So if you commissioned him to build a home for you and you wanted an attic or a basement, no. You wanted a garage? Absolutely not. some of his properties, if anyone has been to any of his properties, I've been to Falling Water. The owners built a garage because he flat out refused. So as soon as he was gone, they built a garage. It's just sometimes some of his work is a little impractical. It's gorgeous, but sometimes it's a little impractical. But he was tapped to do Florida Southern College. So at the time, the president of the college was Lud M. Spivey. And this was the 1930s, and Spivey is thinking that he wants to completely overhaul the campus. So he wants a campus of tomorrow, but he needs an architect to accomplish this. So he's in Lakeland, Florida, and he reaches out to Frank Lloyd Wright. In January of 38, he sends him a letter. The two eventually meet. And then it wasn't until May of that year that 71-year-old Frank Lloyd Wright came down to Florida because he needed to inspect the property. And there were only a few brick buildings there at the time. And Spivey basically said, do what you want. Just do what you want. And Wright looked at those buildings and said, no, this is not going to work with my design. I don't like it. But they gave him free rein. He could essentially design whatever he wanted. So he did. He loved the landscape. So he started to work out his designs and figure out kind of how it would grow because, again, organic architecture. And he called the project a child of the sun because it would grow out of the ground into the sunlight of Florida. So this is actually one of his longest commissions. It took about 20 years. He started in 38. He passed away in 1959. This was finished in 1958. He created 18 designs for the school, 13 of which were built. And the first of those was the Annie Pfeiffer Chapel. This was the first project. They broke ground in 1938. So he gets there May 8th. The 24th, they break ground on the chapel. It was funded by its namesake, Annie Pfeiffer, and it's a hexagonal shape. And you can see through the pictures, he was very big on natural light. He loved natural light. So a lot of his buildings have these crazy skylights, and he wanted it to be both the physical and the spiritual center of the campus. And something really interesting that he did was, well, it was actually Spivey, it wasn't Wright. They used students for the construction because then you didn't have to pay them. You just gave them tuition and room and board, and they built the new buildings for you. The floors are cantilevered, which, does anybody know? Raise your hand if you know what cantilevered is. Maybe? Okay, some of you do. It's essentially you put like the steel rods out and then you cover it with concrete. And the steel that's within the concrete, that's what holds it steady. So if you've seen Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, cantilevers are probably his favorite thing in the world. You see them all the time. So the floors of the chapel are actually cantilevered floors done with Cherokee red cement. And then, as I said, another thing that he did because he loved natural light, there's tons of windows, there's skylights, and he included stained glass so that as the natural light came through, you got multiple colors. It wasn't just clear glass that it was coming through. There is a wire structure on the top of the chapel. You can see it in there. That's actually the skylight, but the students have called it God's bicycle rack because of the way that it sits. It does kind of look like a bicycle rack, but it does serve a purpose. It's there for the skylight. Unfortunately, in 1944, only a few years after its completion, it was damaged in a hurricane, so it was repaired. And then it has undergone restorations both in 98 and 2016 just to preserve it. All of the buildings on campus as one entity are a National Historic Landmark. And if you haven't been there, they do tours. I didn't get there yet, but I will. And in 2009, they added the chapel garden, which is on the south side of the building. That's that picture in the bottom. And then they also, we added some photos of the blueprints as well because it's hard to actually get the dimensions and kind of get a feel for the building as a whole unless you see an aerial view of it. You see, because everything is very geometric. So as soon as he finished the chapel, they were already well underway with the 3 seminar buildings. So L.A. Rollerson, or Louis Audubon Rollerson, was named an honorary chancellor for the school, and he funded the construction of these 3 buildings. They were completed in 1941, and despite him being the complex was named for him, but each building had its own name that it was dedicated to. So the donors were Cora Carter, who was a retired school teacher, Isabel Walbridge, who was the dormitory hostess for Allen Spivey Hall in the 40s and 50s, and Charles Hawkins, who was a professor at the college and the author of the college's alma mater. Later in the 1960s, all of these buildings were connected to create one singular structure, and they still to this day house some of the administrative offices. But it's kind of the same thing. It's hard to get a feel for all of them unless you can kind of get an aerial view of them. So he's got 2 down, 11 to go. So next up is the library. Originally, the E.T. Rue Library, it was dedicated in 1945, and it was named for the treasurer of the Board of Trustees, Edwin Timanus Rue. And unlike most places in Florida, because the landscape could sustain this building had a basement, which is pretty much unheard of in Florida. The reading room is 3 tiers. It's circular, and it's 3 tiers with circulation desk in the center, so you can see that. And the bookshelves, which is really interesting, the bookshelves were done so that light would come in kind of through the windows between them and then through the skylight on the roof of the building. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out because the bookshelves blocked a lot of the light. But again, mostly constructed by students, so they did have to put some lights in. A really interesting thing about this one is 1945, World War II had been happening, so a lot of the male students were gone. So the female students actually stood up and did most of the construction on this building, which is really cool. And then, of course, as the population grew and the school got bigger, a new library had to be constructed. So in 1968, they built a new Rue Library. So this building is no longer called the Rue Library. It is now the Buckner Building. It was named for Thaddeus G. Buckner, who was the husband of an honorary chancellor and trustee for the board for the school. And then this circular room, the reading room, was named for William H. Hollis, who was the vice president of Publix. And over the years, because it's no longer a library, it's been used by student organizations, student council, and then from 92 to 2013, it was the visitor center for the Frank Lloyd Wright Visitor Center until the new building to house that was completed. Something that's really cool that you'll see on the campus is, because Frank Lloyd Wright was not from Florida, as we all know, Florida weather can be a lot. So he created covered walkways that went in between all the buildings. He called these esplanades. 1946, these were unveiled. They cover about 1.5 miles, just running between all the buildings. And the edges of the roofs have been painted green. The columns are evenly spaced. And they're designed to mirror the citrus trees that were all over the property when Wright got there. The base of each column has an engraved name of someone who is significant to the college's history. Something that is very interesting and kind of funny. Frank Lloyd Wright was 5'8", so that was his scale for everything. So the ceilings for these are 7 feet tall. You think about, like, the doors into this room are way higher than that. So I guarantee there's probably some students that probably almost have to duck when they go through here. But that was the scale that he used, so they're 7 feet high. In 2007, they did the Esplanade Garden. It was a quad garden, and it's located by the Polk County Science Building, and it was dedicated to Florida Southern College's landscaping staff in deepest appreciation for making the campus the most beautiful in the nation. I don't know if it is still the most beautiful. Last I heard, that went to Rollins, but this place is way prettier. They literally, I toured Rollins in like 19, and they were like, this is the most beautiful place in the world. Another water feature, this wasn't actually a building. 1948, they did the J. Edgar Wall water dome. It was the only design that he did that was not a building. It was a large fountain, and it was designed at the college's highest point and reflected Wright's dedication to organic architecture. So when it is working properly, all the jets shoot water towards the center and it creates a dome. And this was actually in contrast to the domes that you kind of see, the neoclassical domes you see all over college campuses in the United States. This was kind of his homage to that. It was named for the chairman of the Board of Trustees, J. Edgar Wall. But Wright designed this thing without actually having the technology to make it work. So it pretty much just sat there as a pond for years. In 1968, they paved over a bunch of it, renamed it J. Edgar Wall Plaza. So there were little ponds you can see in the picture. And then in 2007, college president Kerr upgraded it and took it back to what Wright originally intended it to be, which was this dome fountain. So there's 75 jets. They shoot 45 feet in the air. When it is working properly, as I said, it creates that dome. And swimming in the fountain is a finable offense. Students are not supposed to do it, but I mean, it's a college campus. So they finally figured out a compromise, and in 2011, they started the annual tradition at the end of the spring semester called Senior Splash, where graduating seniors are allowed in the fountain. Yes. He continued on, and in 1949, 2 more of his designs were completed. These were the Emil E. Watson and Benjamin Fide Administration buildings. Watson was recognized because of his pioneering work in actuarial science. He actually pioneered the workman's compensation project, and along with his other accomplishments, Fine was a Pulitzer Prize-winning education journalist for the New York Times. And to this day, these buildings still remain. They are offices to the college's administration, and Dr. Spivey actually helped design the president's office, and it is still there. The one cool thing about this is the pool that it has on the north end of the building. It unfortunately rusted out in the 1960s, but was replaced in the 1980s. So it's just a really nice change to the very white modern architecture that you see a lot from him, to have some things so brightly colored. And there are some pictures of the interior as well as the blueprints, so you can kind of get a feel for it. In 1952, they completed the Ordway Industrial Arts Building. So Lucius Pond Ordway was the president of 3M from 1908 to 1910. And originally, when the building was completed in 52, it was named the J. William Horsey Building. But Horsey withdrew his financial support from the project, so they rededicated it and named it for Ordway in 1956. When it was originally designed, it housed the home economics department as well as the industrial workshops. And the building, like so many of them, have undergone a lot of renovations. It was remodeled in 1971 and serves as the headquarters for their political science, history, sociology, psychology departments, as well as other classrooms and where the honors lounge is. There is a courtyard that is there. You can see that. That was done for the Rhoda family in 2008. And then Professor William Gregory Fletcher, who was the class of 1900 and one of their oldest living alumni, passed away in 1952, the theater in the round that is within the building was renamed the William Fletcher Theater, and that has also undergone some renovations over the years. But in 2012, Dr. Mark C. Hollis Sr. funded the renovation of the theater, and in 2024, if you heard this, the college announced that it will actually be the new home of the School of Architecture for Florida Southern will be housed in the Ordway building. So it's going to get a new life here in the next couple of years. In 1955, they completed the second chapel on the property. March 4th, 1955, it was dedicated to William H. Danforth, who was the founder of the Ralston Purina Company, and donated $10,000 for the building to be completed. It's a non-denominational chapel, kind of like most campuses throughout the U.S. have. And this was a big part of his Child of the Sun architectural theming. And just like the Pfeiffer Chapel has Cherokee red concrete floors, a low entrance, and walls of windows that also featured stained glass. This chapel also has its own organ, a fireplace, classroom space, and seating on the second floor. And you can see right behind the pulpit the light that comes in through the stained glass. And the space has been used for musical events, poetry readings, and lectures. But it was Danforth's philosophy that if you have a balance of physical health, mental health, social, and religious, you will have a very healthy life. And this was, following Danforth Chapel, only one additional building was done. So we're kind of at the end because we're getting close to the end of his life. The final building that was completed for Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture was the Polk County Science Building. There are additional buildings on the campus that look like they're Frank Lloyd architecture, but that was because one of his, not students, but an architect who worked with him created those designs so that they were very closely in line to what Frank Lloyd Wright had created originally. But this building is named for Polk County, which is where Lakeland is. And it was, as I said, his last original building on the campus. It was created through a series of connected buildings to house the STEM offices, the labs, the lecture rooms, computer labs, as well as, in a huge twist for Frank Lloyd Wright, storage for all of their stuff. It is a unique building because it houses the only planetarium that Frank Lloyd Wright ever designed. And it wasn't until April of 1960 that the first show was done in the planetarium. And it was used continuously until 1999. That kind of equipment doesn't last so long. The building was not disrepair, but it was getting older. So in 99, it was rededicated to just the planetarium to John Raymond Miller and his wife Eleanor. On February 9th, 2001, it was rededicated, reopened, it was renovated, the equipment was updated, the paint was actually completely redone so that it would be a much closer match to Frank Lloyd Wright's original color scheme. And in 2021, they were able to do additional upgrades with a National Parks Service grant that was given to them. And then they received a matching grant, money to match that grant from a local philanthropist. And obviously, these buildings, we all know it. This building was built in 1927, so the upkeep, especially in Florida with the rain and everything. So the 21 grant was able to help repair some water damage, update some equipment, the restoration, and really just kind of take it back to what Frank Lloyd Wright originally intended it to be. Now, this, as I said, it's the largest collection of Frank Lloyd Wright's work in the entire country. And as I said, there are some other buildings on the property that were not done by him, but they look like they were done by him. There is also a Frank Lloyd Wright memorial because of all of the work that he did. And he, throughout his life, created over 20,000 designs for things, and about 400 designs were actually seen to fruition. I didn't include a slide of this, but Falling Water, the Guggenheim in New York City, the Taliesin houses, and the majority of the properties that he created throughout his career are now literal museums like the Guggenheim, or a lot of the houses have become museums because just over time you don't want to renovate that stuff, but they're not terribly practical. Another really interesting thing was that when he started work on Florida Southern College, he said, everything's going to be great, skylights, all of it, we don't need air conditioning. Which, if you live in Florida, air conditioning was not really a thing when he was building these, but still, if you live in Florida, you know that that's probably not true. So again, things have been upgraded, but the best thing is that a lot of the facades have stayed the same, so it is quintessential Frank Lloyd Wright. And with that, does anybody have questions? Yes, ma'am.
Not a question, but I just wanted to add,
designs.
Hmm.
So it's when it was built in 2013, 2014, I can't remember what year. It was the first time an actual Frank Lloyd Wright design had been done in 60 years.
Cool.
And what it was what he envisioned the school teacher or the
Yes.
professors would live in.
Yes.
So the kitchen is very small. He wanted everybody out and about. So
Yep.
it is very interesting. And to just go on the campus, it's, like I said, not in the middle of summer. But in Polk Science right now, that's they're trying to renovate that.
Oh, okay.
Because things are, well, he used Florida sand.
Yes, he did.
So a lot of it is not as durable as we would like.
Yeah.
And, and when you said about the risers and how short he was and everything like that, when we would go on campus, I mean, we would 2 or 3 steps at a time, and the basketball player did not like the stuff. But beautiful campus, well worth the trip down there. And but it is a walk.
Yes.
I mean, when they take you around, but it is beautiful.
So for those people online that can't hear that, the comment is that the visitor center that was constructed and opened, I believe, 2013, is actually one of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs that he created. It was intended for where teachers will be housed, but it became the visitor center. And like you said, he always was trying to push people outside. That was his big thing. Like if you visit some of his properties, low ceilings, low doorways, but you go outside and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So definitely I need to get down there. I have not gotten there yet. It's close to my house, so that's really bad. But yes, maybe not in the middle of summer, but highly recommend. Any other questions? Yes.
So did you go to Florida Southern? I'm a proud graduate of Florida Southern.
Gail, right?
Yeah, you're looking familiar, so we need to talk. Well, as a
I'm on Gail train. I know who you are.
Oh my, so we're taking down.
Anyway, as a farm girl from New York, I went to college down there. I did not have the appreciation and understanding of his architecture because I just thought it was all weird. But as you get older, you understand it. But the big thing was the basketball players did not walk under the walkway. He had to be short. His steps were only like 3 inches high and they were long. And I recognize your voice now. But it was a great place to go to college, and I think it's still on that list of one of the best colleges as far as
It is.
the beautiful colleges, and they have a great tour down there. And even since we graduated, they have done a lot to improve.
Well, when you talked about the water dome, that of course is not there. When
Yes.
we were there, it was 3 pools, but when they did dig it out to make it what it is, they actually found an alligator in one underneath some areas that had been living there for who knows how long or whatever. And so it was filthy. I mean, those ponds were filthy usually.
The chapel brings back memories because we used to go to services there and all that too. So it's a beautiful, like I said, it's more beautiful than when we went.
Oh yeah,
They really upgraded.
Dr. Kerr made sure of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Any other questions in the room? Any questions online? Oh, God. Okay.
What is this that I've heard of Frank Lloyd Wright and mistresses and
Those architects.
Oh, boy. Okay, so the question is Frank Lloyd Wright and just his very tumultuous personal life. I don't know if a lot of you know this. It's like Picasso. His work is absolutely incredible, but as a person, he just was not great. People said that he was really difficult to work for. He was very particular, which is understandable. But he was egotistical. He was a narcissist. He left multiple wives and children, had multiple mistresses. I mean, again, the architecture kind of negates what he did. Something we learned, totally off topic, but something we learned is that at Taliesin in Wisconsin in 1914, if I remember correctly, he had a mistress living there and he had staff, and she and her 2 children were murdered by one of the other staff members, who then lit the exterior wall of the dining room on fire so that the people that were in the dining room would have to get past him to get out. So then Frank Lloyd Wright had his sons dig a grave for this woman behind a church in the middle of the night. He had his carpenter make her coffin. I don't know what happened to the kids. Like, my coworker is actually real in this right now, trying to figure it out. We go down these rabbit holes a lot. And then 2 weeks later, he moved his next mistress in. Like, the house was basically still smoldering, and he moved the next woman in. But, again, he was an architectural genius, even though he was a lot. Yes. A lot of connections. It seems, I mean, it happens with a lot of artists. A lot of them are like that, especially this time period, like that all of these guys were in. But yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright, he was a genius, and his work is incredible. But, I mean, something's got to give. Any other questions? All right. Oh, thanks.